We all want to change what we look like.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, I think we're set up. Yeah, we're good? Yep. You. Okay. Here, welcome everybody to this new venue. Sort of new old venue. Hi everybody. We're in the basement of the church. And it's tolerable weather-wise, yeah? Fine. It's fine? It's fine. There are no windows, so I think about it being a safe room. That's where my mind goes to these days.
And
Okay, why do you only
we're
see-
still on top of the world. So
We are? Okay. All right about that. Okay, so people will see that what I'm teaching today is definitely informed by this moment. And July 4th was yesterday, July 4th weekend. But I want to get at the underpinnings of the moment, not talk about the moment, because everyone sees the moment differently, right? So we'll see how we can land into it, and maybe you'll land differently. Maybe it won't resonate. We'll see. Who knows? But Shabbat Shalom this July 4th weekend. Great to see people. Hi, Razel. Hi, David. Hi, Richard. Hi, Asher Chaim. Hi, Bob. It says Shelly, but I'll say Bob. Hi, Deb. And hi to all the people that I don't see their faces yet, but, oh, hi, Amy. Good to see you. Okay, hi, everybody in the room. Hi, Kenya. Okay, ready to roll? Ready to learn? Yeah? Great. So let us screen share the bracha over learning Torah. Everybody in cacophony, if you want to unmute, feel free. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu so divrei Torah. Blessed are you, source of all life, meaning of all existence, who has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to soak in your revelation. Amen, amen. Okay. Hi. Hi. Good to see everybody. Okay, so today is the very rich and mysterious parsha. It's called Chukat. But before we dive into Chukat, the portion, and specifically we're going to be dealing with Miriam's death, grief, rage, hitting a rock, all that good stuff. Before we get there, I have a few opening quotes. I just want to read some opening questions. We don't have to discuss it. So let me see if I can share my screen. Here we go. Okay, I just want to say that Sefaria, the platform on which I create source sheets, has changed. It's become a nightmare, which means that you'll see lots of different size texts and strange things, or fonts, you'll see strange things, but I think it's all here for us, nevertheless, imperfect as it is. So I call this Wells of Grief, Leadership in the Wilderness. Oh, I should have written Parshat Chukat, but it's Parshat Chukat, the portion of Chukat. So given July 4th, and given what's happening in this country, I was thinking about these iconic words, first from the 18th century, and the Declaration of, and the Declaration of Independence, and it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. So I got caught right there because I feel like in our society right now, we don't hold any truths as self-evident. Like there's a split, and more than a split, in how we understand what is happening and what life means and is. Then it says that all men are created equal. So that's interesting because it's only men, number one. And slaves were not included here, and indigenous people were not included. So it's like, oh, it's self-evident. All men are created equal. But they didn't include all humans, for sure. That they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So those are some of the words in which our country was founded. And then I wonder right now, this is not a question to be answered, I'm just asking it, what truths do we hold to be self-evident? What's self-evident? in our experience. Oh my God, that's true. I don't need to read something to tell me that's true. True. And then the Gettysburg Address, right? What is it? 78 years later, 1963, 87. Did I do? How's the math? 87 years later. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. But it meant something different. All men are created equal at this moment means something different, right? So that's amazing. It starts to become more inclusive. And there's that word, that strange word, liberty, that is so alive in this moment as well. And then I love this quote from Audre Lorde. Poet, writer, thinker, who says, there are no new ideas still waiting in the wings to save us as women, as humans. There are only new ways of making them felt. So I feel that when I read Torah all the time. It's like these are new old ideas. They're new in that they're inviting us to feel them anew and sort of share the wisdom that comes from that feeling anew. Okay, so with that, I segue into what are these new old texts going to teach us? Or what are these old texts that we're feeling anew going to teach us? So in this part, there are two deaths. Opens with Miriam's death, and then later on we have Aaron's death, and in the middle there's hitting the rock. So it's really a parsha that's saturated in grief. And it opens, the parsha doesn't open with Miriam's death. Oh, what's happening? What is this? It opens with the red heifer, which also relates to death. You don't? It opens with the red heifer, which is already about purifying. What is this? Hit the Zoom icon. Thank you. Which is already about death and purifying from being tamei, impure, from contact with death. Okay, so after we hear about the red heifer, we have these verses. Numbers 20, first one. Vayavo b'nei Israel kol ha'edah, the whole congregation, midbar sin b'chodesh harishon, vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh, v'tamat sham Miriam, v'tikaver sham. So the Israelites, or the children of Israel, came, the whole congregation. So it's really specifying the whole people, the whole community. And that word for community or congregation is based in the root, which means to bear witness, which is interesting, given what happens a little bit later. They're in the wilderness of Sin in the first month, and they settled there in a place called Kadesh, which also means holiness, right? And there's a sense of settling, Vatamat Sham Miriam. And Miriam died there. So there's that extra word there, Vatikaver Sham, and she was buried there. So twice we have Sham, meaning there, and we don't need that word. And I feel like that, combined with the word settling, really focuses on place. Right? There's something going on here with place, and there's a lot of interesting place names. And we'll see we return to makom, or the word for place, at the end of this passage as well. So she dies. We don't know anything about her, about the community's response to her death. We don't have anything about grief, but we immediately have, there's no water for the community. So what's the connection, right? So they assembled this Edah, right? This, people of testimony, assembled against Moshe and against Aaron, and that's the same verb that's used for how they gang up on Aaron when they want a golden calf. And they're insisting on a golden calf. Now, before we go on, I want to do a little Rashi with you. Rashi. 11th century French commentator. Kol Heida. So he defines Eida in a real kol, the whole congregation, in a really interesting way, which I'll talk about, well, which we'll see in a minute. And there's something interesting here also going on with time. So in the last parsha, we had the rebellion of Korach, and that was at least understood by the rabbis. I don't quite know if it matches up specifically in the biblical or the internal biblical chronology, and maybe someone can speak to that. But that was at the end of the first year of their experience in the wilderness. And then 38 years somehow passed between the end of that parsha and this moment. And Rashi says, Eidah Hashlema, the whole, the full community, the complete community, Shekvar Meitu Meitei HaDevar, the Elu Pershu Lachayim. The congregation in its entirety, for those who were to die in the wilderness in consequence of their sin, the sin of the spies, had already died. But these had been expressly mentioned for life, or these had been set off to the side or designated for life. So if you remember, as a consequence of the sin of the spies and the whole community sort of losing faith in really the whole enterprise of going to the promised land, losing faith in the promise and wanting to go back to Egypt. In fact, they organized a movement to go back to Egypt. As a consequence of not wanting to go forward, God said, well, you can't go forward. You can't go to the promised land. And that whole generation that left Egypt died in the wilderness, right? Except for Caleb and Joshua. So these are the remnants. It says, and it's almost ironic, it says Eidah, the whole people, but it's actually the remnants. It's what's left over. Okay. All right, so let's go on in Rashi. This is only Rashi in the first verse. The Tamat Sham Miriam died there. And then Rashi asks a very interesting question. Lama and the Midrash, there's a lot of Midrash about this. This is like a real sort of high essence of the Midrash, which Rashi often does. Lama nismacha parashat mitat Miriam leparashat parah. So Rashi's asking a great literary question. Why does the Torah have the death of Miriam, this episode, coming right after all the laws of the red heifer? What do the two have to do with each other? And if you're reading a good poem or a good good piece of literature, you're always asking that question. Why does this come after this? Like, why are these two in proximity? So what's the answer? Lomar lecha, to say to you, ma korbanot lechaprim, just as offerings or sacrifices atone, even mitat tzadikim lechaperet, the death of the righteous atone. Now that's really interesting. Right? The death in Judaism, there's this idea, the death of the righteous atone. What is this? Oh, wait, I'm just trying to see what Asher Chaim is saying there. Asher Chaim dislikes something. I have to see what Asher Chaim dislikes. This gloss. Oh, okay. So you don't like the equation of sin and impurity. I hear that. Totally hear that you don't like this idea. Okay, got it. So yes, so impurity and sin are actually not equated in the Torah itself, but just rabbinically. Just rabbinically. So purity in the Torah is very much almost like a chemical reaction, right? You have contact with this, you're like that. You have contact with that, you become like that, and you need to purify yourself to be returned to life. But here, where's what happened?
Sin and impurity.
In Rashi's assumption. Only in Rashi's assumption, based on the rabbis. So Rashi's saying the way sacrifices, or the way the red heifer atones, right? Atones as opposed to purifies. So that word is Rashi's assumption. Okay? Does that make sense? But thank you for asking. Just so the death of the righteous atone. Now, where else do we have that idea? Christianity, right? The death of somebody atones for sins. Wow. right? So it's not only, it seems to have been circulating around that time and place. And Judaism and Christianity express it differently, although related. Okay, wait, can you wait, please? You want to speak?
You don't have to say please, Rabbi. I'm backing.
But I want you to say the thing, I just want you to raise your hand. Don't back off.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So this is a larger thing about like how the Hasidic rabbis actually take on, gurus who take on.
Hey, could you move closer to the mic, please, so the people online can hear you? Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Of course,
Carolyn. Thank
of course. This is a long story from Hinduism and Judaism and Christianity, all of which the guru or the Rebbe takes on the sin/tension/karma of his or her.
So the leader becomes an exemplar for the people. A symbol, like a symbolic
kisses
representation.
and dies the gooey death again and again, not
Dies
just
the what?
the gooey death,
What's gooey?
the unpleasant death, the unpleasant death.
Whose death is pleasant?
Some are more pleasant than others, but
Okay,
in any
so they
case,
die in a pleasant death.
they
Okay.
at least get a fever and shake as
No,
they.
Moshe dies a beautiful death.
Well, like I said, some do, some don't.
Okay, go ahead.
Some do, some don't. He's already paid his dues.
Okay,
Anyway, it's a larger food for thought around how we redeem each other through suffering for each other.
and
And through dying in some sense.
thinking about death as a gift to your community.
Amen.
Whoa, that's intense.
Yeah.
Okay, I said it, but it's intense. Okay, Rachel. Well, hold on one second. Caroline, could you let the people in the waiting room? There's people waiting in the waiting room. I can't, I don't. Oh, well, actually, I do have it. Sorry, forget it. I can, oh, you got it.
Already done, thank you.
So for 3 years, I lived with my kids on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. And for the dairy farm, a heifer is a female cow who has reproduced one time. Now, I don't know if that's true.
Interesting.
But
That's
if
true
it
here. I have no idea.
is, if it is, then
Yeah.
this heifer is without blemish. Why is that so interesting?
Why is what so interesting?
That the animal has already known sex and is without blemish. I don't know. It just gets me going, you know.
Yeah, but I want to stick to, I don't want to go off on the red heifer,
No,
because
that's
that's not the
okay.
topic.
That's okay. Miriam, however, never had kids, right? So she's not a heifer.
Miriam is complicated. Miriam in the Torah never had kids. The rabbis decide she had kids. In fact, we're going to meet some of them.
Oh, so if Miriam can be a red heifer.
What?
Miriam then, if Miriam, according to the
Oh,
rabbi.
Miriam could be a red
then
heifer.
She could be a
Beautiful.
red heifer. Okay, I'm all
Beautiful.
done.
Okay, all right, I'm going to go on. All right, let me just see. Hamas says in Christianity, the death of Christ is a much more old-fashioned and less subtle event. Less an atonement and more an exact restaging of temple sacrifice. He is literally called the Lamb of God. But we all hear all the time, Tomas, that Jesus died for our sins. Is this in contrast to that idea? Let's see. Yeah, rabbinic sin creates a state of distance from the holy. Exactly, that it's similar to the alienation created by ritual impurity and sin as well. Right? Sin also creates that distance. I know you dislike the bluff. Okay, I'm gonna go on. Okay, am I missing any hands? Okay, let me just go on with Rashi. Okay, so this is really interesting, and in fact, it's important for the next text. There's a little literary interpretation war going on. But Hamat Miriam, so she dies there. And so Rashi, what's bothering Rashi is that Moshe dies with a kiss of God, and Aaron dies by a kiss of God, but not Miriam. So what's going on? So he says, she also died by the kiss of God. And so why doesn't the Torah say by the mouth of God? What? There's not the way of the respect of God. In other words, you don't say this with Miriam because she's a woman. See, it doesn't spell it in Rashi, but it spells it out here in the English as it would have been reference to a woman. But of Aaron, it says, Al pi Adonai, in Numbers 33. Okay. Now, let's look a little bit. I couldn't find this whole text in Hebrew, so I'll do it in English, but one little part in Hebrew, which is interesting. So here, Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, he was also known as the Piazetzner Rebbe, if I'm saying that correctly, really profound commentary, and was murdered by the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto. And he says, like, what is Rashi talking about? When you talk about God, it's not a literal kiss, right? Heaven forfend that this nishika, this kiss, should be an actual physical kiss. Like, what are you talking about, Rashi, right? So, doesn't like that. Just like Asher Chaim doesn't like that equation, right? Doesn't like what Rashi's doing here. What? Yes, exactly. Okay. Miriam did die by divine kiss. This is Rashi. But scripture does not apply the key phrase al pi Adonai by God's mouth because of her level of spiritual attainment was even higher than that of Moses and Aaron. So there's a different take on this. Why doesn't it say by the mouth of God? Or the kiss of God? So she had a higher spiritual attainment. Interesting. Why? Why? Than that of Moshe and Aaron. Why? Since her efforts were not attributable to divine elicitation. This English is a mouthful, but rather to her own self-generated effort. So in other words, the well was within. It was not channeling something without, but she somehow was in touch with this flow within. The source of her service was within her. It flowed internally from her. That is why the well. So let me just say something about the well. So the rabbis said that for all 40 years that the Israelites were in the wilderness, they had a well of water because of Miriam's merit. We'll see that actually in Rashi in a second. That is why the well, the flowing source of holy living water, appeared by virtue of her merit. Now, I will say, when we see another text by him later, that his wife's name was Miriam. And there's this whole thing about grief and Miriam that we'll see later that he gets into that relates not only to the biblical text, but also to his life. So the last Rashi, I thought there was another one, sorry. Okay, it doesn't matter. So Rashi also says, and maybe I left it off, that it's clear that the well comes from Miriam, or it is in her merit because she dies and immediately the well disappears. Like simple juxtaposition. Okay, God bless you. Okay, so I'm going on now in verse 2. V'lo hayam mayim la'idah. There's no water for the community. I read this already. Vayikahalu al Moshe v'al Aaron, and they assemble against Moshe and against Aaron, really ganged up. Bless you. Vayarev ha'am in Moshe, even quarrel with Moshe. So even though this is a new generation, it's an old trope. Vayomru le'mor v'lu gavanu b'guva achenu l'fnei Adonai. Why don't we die the death of our brothers before God? Presumably, they're referring to the sin of the spies and the Ammon. Why don't we die like them? We want to die. Miriam died, we want to die. Or there's no water and we want to die. This is such a painful condition. And why did you bring this congregation to this, again, this emphasis on place, to this wilderness? Lamut Sham, to die there, again, that word Sham. Anachnu u'v'yireinu, us and our cattle. And then that old question, Lama Elitunu Mitzrayim. And why'd you raise us up out of Egypt? Lavina Otano, to bring us El Hamakom, to this place. Hara, bad, this bad place. El Hamakom Hara has bad. Kabashu. Lo Makom Zera Utena. It's not a place of seeds and figs. The Geffen, vines, the Rimon and pomegranates. Well, Mayan and starts, and there's no water to drink. So they're in a bad place. And does it relate to their grief of Miriam, for Miriam? If you recall, when Miriam spoke out against Moshe, she was stricken with leprosy. She was sent out of the camp for 7 days. The whole community hated her. They're very attached to Miriam. They're connected to Miriam. But here there's no grief, but there's no water, and they want to die. And sometimes, right, we bypass grief to physical discomfort. We bypass grief to complaint, right? So is there a bypass going on, right, to just, their physical experience, and they're not wanting to be literally where they are. They don't want to be where they are. Okay. Okay, so we did this, and now we're going to go on to what happens with the rock. But let me just see if there are any questions or comments before we go forward. And we'll see, I think, in the whole episode with Moshe hitting the rock, striking the rock, that there's this intensification of grief. Okay. I like that people are in listening mode today. I'm going to go back to sharing. Here we go. Okay, so this is next verse from what we just looked at in the Torah. And it's such a mysterious, right, piece of text. Because Moshe, as a result of this, is not allowed into the promised land and will die. And so, like, what's happening here? Like, why is it so serious to hit a rock instead of speak to it? So there are no less than 13 interpretations of what happened here. And I was listening to Aviva Zornberg. In fact, it's a great study session. The link is on the source sheet. And she says there's so many interpretations because no one really understands it, right? So when there's a lot of mystery, you just get more and more text and commentary. Okay. Sit here. Vayavo Moshe v'Aaron mipnei hakahal el petach olam moed. Vayiplu al paneim. Okay, so they're upset. Moshe and Aaron came away from the presence of the assembly, right? There they are complaining again and wanting to go back into Egypt and not sort of bought into the enterprise, right? It's sort of like there's no partnership here. But it's all about taking this people into the promised land and fulfilling that promise. And they, they're like, why did we leave Egypt? So it really goes to the heart of the enterprise. Vayipol al paneim, and they flung themselves on their faces, they fell on their faces, which they often do in a moment of surrender, like, what do we do now? I'm just trying to see the dots here. Vayar kavod Adonai alehem, and the glory of Adonai was seen by them. So God responds to their sense of surrender and their moment of prayer. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, and God says to Moshe, saying, "Kach et hamateh v'hakahal et ha'ida." So take the staff and assemble the community. Oh, v'hakel et ha'ida, I'm sorry, assemble the community. Atav Aharon achicha, you and your brother Aaron. The dibartem el hasela, and speak to the rock, le'einehem, before the eyes of the congregation, right? So it's interesting, speak, right, one sense, but eyes, another sense, right? So somehow the people of Israel have to see Moshe speaking to the rock. V'natan lemav, and it will give its waters. I think that also already indicates some relationship with the rock, which is important, that it will freely give. V'hotzeka lehem mayim, and you will take from, you are to bring them out water from the boulder. V'hotzeka lehem mayim min hasela, V'hishkita et heda. And this is a really interesting verb because it's hipio, it's causative, and you will water the congregation. Very beautiful, right? Cause them to be watered, cause them to have water. And their cattle, the et biram, so the animals are present in these passages. Okay, so let's see what Moses does. So he takes the staff, Milifnei Adonai, from before God, which means that we're not in the sanctuary, so that's where the staff is being kept. Asher Sivahu, as he was commanded. Vayakilu Moshe v'Aaron et hakahal. And Moshe and Aaron assembled the assembly. But Vayakilu, I'm wondering if this grammatical form here, Vayakilu, is the same as what the people did to Moshe and Aaron by ganging up on them. Let me just see. Vayikahalu, got it. Vayakilu. I don't know. Asher might say something about this, the form of this verb. But it seems to me to be intensive. So Moshe and Aaron gathered the congregation before the face of the rock, right, or before the presence of the rock, which is interesting, and said to them, Vayomer lahem. So here's, to me, the crux of rage and anger coming together in Moshe. And notice, God is not angry here. Usually it's God is angry and Moshe's not, and Moshe's protecting the people. Here is the opposite, right? We're going to see Moshe's anger, and God just wants to water the people. Okay. Shin'u na hamorim. Listen, you rebels. Amin hasela hazeno tzilachem mayim. From this rock, are we going to get you water? Now, what's startling here, I noticed this maybe about 10 years ago or so. The word for rebels, it has the exact same letters as Miriam, right? So it could be read as, listen, Miriam, am I going to get from this rock, water for the community? It could be Moshe's grief coming out as rage, right? So Miriam seems to be embedded in this verse in some way. And Moshe's like, listen, Miriam, like, I need your help. I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm so angry because I can't do this. Such a moment of helplessness. And so what does Moshe do then? Vayarem Moshe yado vayach. So Moshe lifts up his hand and he hits the rock. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that might be the same verb that's used when Moshe strikes the Egyptian and murders him. B'matehu, with his staff, pa'amayim, twice. It's mayim rabim, and a lot of water came out. Mayim rabim, v'tesh ta'ida u'be'iram, and the congregation and their cattle drank. Vayom Adonai el Moshe el Haron, and Adonai. So it worked out well. They got water, right? But there's a problem, and now we see the problem. God said to Moshe and Aaron, because you didn't have faith, Yan lo ha'amantem bi, in me, right? And that word emunah is really interesting. It also means guardian. It also means wet nurse. It's related to the verb for suckling. It's really interesting. So somehow you didn't have trust in me. You didn't connect to me. You didn't have faith in me. Lahakti sheni, to sanctify me, le'enei b'nei Israel, before the eyes of all of Israel, or before the eyes of the children of Israel. Lachen, for this, lo taviu et hakahal hazeh el ha'aretz asher natati lahem. I will not bring you. You will not bring this congregation to the land that I have given them. Hema me meriva sharavu b'nei Israel Adonai ikadesh bam. These were the waters of Meribah, quarreling, where where the children of Israel quarreled with Adonai, and God was made holy. That's interesting. He is not capitalized in the translation. So I presume, and I think it is God, was made holy through them, through the children of Israel, or through the waters. Interesting. How is God made holy here? So Rashi says actually through the deaths of Moshe and Aaron. So let me stop my share. Actually, you know what? If there are no burning hands, I'm going to do one more text. Because remember, there was a time where Moshe was commanded to hit the rock. And that was way back in Exodus before Sinai, in Exodus 17. So this is definitely in literary sort of conversation with that one. That one was really different. Let's ask in a moment why. But it's Moshe, so they're again complaining about water. Verse 4, Exodus 17, Vayisach Moshe Adonai lemor, Ma e'aseh la'am hazeh od ma'at u'sikaluni. So Moshe is yelling to God, what am I going to do with this nation? In a minute they're gonna stone me because they're so thirsty. ויאמר אדוני אל משה עבור לפני העם וקח איתך מזקני ישראל ומטך אשר הכית בו את היאור קח בידך והלכת. And God said to Moshe, go before the nation and take with you from the elders of Israel and the staff with which you hit the Nile. Take it in your hand and go. So that's interesting. That sort of memory of the Nile, right? And the power of that staff, which on one hand is for punishment, on the other hand it's for blessing, right? As when Moshe split the Reed Sea. Hineni omed lefanecha sham al hatzur v'chorev v'hikita b'tzur v'yatz'u mimenu mayim shataham. Here I stand before you there on the rock at Choreb, but to strike the rock and water shall come out of it, and the people shall drink. Moshe did thus before the eyes of the elders of Israel. So why is it okay for him to hit the rock? Or why would God command him to hit the rock here and speak to the rock in Deuteronomy? I mean, in Numbers. Now, let's remember this is a very developmentally different moment. Right? So this is before Sinai, before God has revealed God's word to the people. It's not a moment yet of speaking. It's a moment of striking. Right? If you think about the plagues and Moshe killing the Egyptian and, so much violence. And then here in Numbers, we've already transitioned to the word, but Moshe hasn't. Moshe regresses, one could say maybe because it was grief for his sister. But he regressed, and because of that regression, I said, no, you don't understand what this moment is for my people. You can't take them out if you're in that book. You got to move to this book, and to the book of Deuteronomy, and to the book of, and to like moving forward to the promise. This is all regression, Moshe. This is wrong. And it's a lack of faith and knowledge of who I am and who your people are. Okay, so we're going to look in a minute what Rambam says about this moment. But let me see if there are any comments. Oh my God, there's surprisingly little. Few comments. Okay, but Wendy, come to the microphone.
Years.
What?
Go back up for almost 3 years.
Oh. That's interesting. Oh, what's that? Oh, that's not. Okay. Let me just get rid of that. Wendy.
Okay, a couple of things.
Uh-huh.
Number one, I wanted to talk about Miriam and her affiliation with water. And in rabbinic literature, water is affiliated with Torah. And so hence, her being affiliated with water is an elevation. Like she put her brother Moses in the Nile River water, and she sang at the sea, and the water in the
And when she
the
dies, the
desert.
water stops.
Right. And so, you were saying why she didn't have the mouth of God on her, the kiss of God on her, because she was already elevated to the level of Torah.
Beautiful.
The The other,
We should throw them.
the other thing I wanted to talk about is that with the red heifer, that the person who's given the task of overseeing the red heifer is Aaron's son, Eleazar, as opposed to Aaron, who was the Kohen Gadol at the time. And
As opposed to Aaron, who was high priest at the time.
Right, and it didn't even say like Aaron and Eleazar, it just said Eleazar. And I think that this was a foreshadowing of Aaron's death, because he would not have a place in the future.
So there's already a transition happening there.
Right, that it should have been either him or him with Eleazar, and it's only Eleazar.
Yes, that's beautiful. So this whole parsha is really a moment of transition on so many levels.
So that's sort of the foreshadowing of Aaron's death.
Right.
And I also just wanted to make mention that Miriam, Aaron, and Moses died all within 1 year. And that Miriam dies in Nisan, Aaron dies in Av, and Moses dies in Sinai Adar.
This is all
So
rabbinic deduction.
it's a complete 1 year.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, Edith, do you have it?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Stop me from going, I'm going ahead.
Okay, good.
Sorry. I see here that God explicitly says, speak to the rock,
Yes.
right? And then Moshe just doesn't.
And Moshe just does
He
it.
just completely disobeys. Like,
Totally
Is
disobeys.
there another place where that feels radical?
Violent God.
That feels radical to him.
Yeah, I don't think there is another sense. I think that's a really good point.
He has
It's a
this-
really strong
He
point.
has this relationship with God that no other human.
Literally, well, he did
Right.
shatter the tablets.
But was he?
But no, but this is, you're right,
Directly instructed to do
you're
something.
right, this is a direct instruction and direct disobedience.
Sure.
And it's a moment of rage. It's a moment he just loses it.
And also, it feels like a huge, just made me think of, it feels like this is something I think I've never felt in my experience in Moshe's relationship with God, that Moshe is actually taking it for granted in this moment. Like, it's not just not,
It's like, I'll get the water for you, for the people another way, and God, you'll comply.
right, and like.
It's really
I
interesting.
have this,
Yeah.
like, Moshe has this, has language with God that no one else has, and so to just
Someone just
betray
said
that.
pass the microphone, but people can
To just
hear.
betray that language is
Uh-huh.
like
Uh-huh.
horrifying.
Uh-huh.
I never heard so.
Okay, well, hold on, I see your hand, but there are people up there.
I know.
I think that's a really strong point, Eden, that this is such a massive, disobedience in the face of God's explicit instructions. I also think, and I'm just going to say this now, even though it doesn't directly relate, but maybe it does. There's something here that has to do with Moshe's relationship to the earth that I think foreshadows what the promised land is. He's not supposed to hit the rock. He's supposed to speak to it. He's supposed to let something happen and have trust in the separate agency of this inanimate object, right? Which is really like a loss of trust on so many levels. So what the land of the promise is it's a place of full partnership between God and the Israelites, but one could also say maybe between the Israelites and the land, right? What does it mean to treat the land as it's sacred? Okay, so I'm going to now, I see a lot of hands. So I'm going to first call on people who haven't spoken before, and Beth's been waiting, and then Asher Chaim. I'm going to ask for quick comments, but I have to leave a little early because services are not in this building. So I'm going to have to run a little bit early. So services are at the hospital, but they won't be hostile. Okay, Beth.
Shabbat Shalom. I apologize, I couldn't hear everything that Eden said, but I'm always struck around the issue of Moshe's sins with his killing of the Egyptian. I mean, in my estimation, that's the worst thing he ever did that we know of. And, granted, the revelation at Sinai hadn't occurred yet, so we did not have an explicit commandment from God not to kill people. But, talking about whole truths as being self-evident, I would think the prohibition against murder would be one of them. DeBarty.
So I think again, Beth, I think your point is well taken, and it points to the developmental nature of Moshe and the Israelites, which is really, so to speak, striking, right? So Moshe starts off as a person who kills, in protection of somebody, but he starts off as a person who murders. And then he also then is a person, without words, and ends up in Deuteronomy, like there's a whole book in his voice. So there's this incredibly radical developmental arc, which I think you just underlined. Okay, yeah.
I was before.
Oh, you were. I'm so sorry. You were before.
I just want to mention that water is a metaphor for the Shekhinah. And one of the reasons I believe that Moshe was so angry is that the behavior of of all these stragglers or whoever were keeping the Shekhinah from being with them. And that's one of the reasons.
So, Batya, you
so
don't see it as in relation to his sister's death? Yeah, do you see his anger in relationship to Miriam's death at all? Or you just see it as about the people's needs?
I'm sorry?
Do you see, what I was suggesting is that this moment of anger is sort of grief becoming anger.
Yeah, it's maybe a combination of both.
Yeah.
Just the very fact that they could be so resolute and upset was keeping the Shekhinah away from us.
Okay, all right.
And that's a big sin and terrible happening.
Yeah, I also blame the people around me for keeping the Shekhinah. Okay, Ben.
Good Shabbos.
Yeah.
So I'm wrestling a little bit with the issue of leadership as it's flowing through both this Parsha and last week's Parsha. I think there's sort of a crisis of leadership, and that this is part of. And so previously we had Korah coming and being like, who made you leader? And now we have this issue where really Miriam is dying and was a leader. People were caring a great deal about her, and she has this kind of divine essence flowing out of her. It has this connection with the water. But she is not made a formal leader. Whereas we have, maybe not. And then we have, I think, Moshe now kind of having his leadership being questioned by God to the extent that, there's this consequence to his, like you're saying, he might be out of anger, it might be out of aggression, but whatever it is, he seems to be struggling with his role of listening to God, and being this kind of interlocutory, as you said before, between trying to represent the people's interests to God and trying to represent God's interests to the people.
Right.
And I feel like that's kind of, it seems like there's a breakdown.
Yeah, totally.
In that. And to me, that speaks directly to these questions that you raised at the beginning about the nature of democracy and the nature of leadership around who are the people, who are the men that are created equal and who have the right to form a government.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a bit of a break. There has been an inherent tension, and has been from the beginning of the Constitution and trying to formulate this government that doesn't have a king, around or divine, to separate out the divine authority and to figure out For example, do the elites have more of a say? How much more of a say than the people? If everybody's equal, who gets to have more representation? Who gets to be the senators? Who gets to be the electors? Who gets to have these special elevated roles?
Okay.
And I think that that same sort of tension is sort of expressing itself here, where it's like, on the one hand, you have, like, in conversation with last week's Parsha also.
It's not only last week's Parsha, the whole book of Numbers, there's constant challenges to their authority, right? Even Miriam and Aaron speaking out against Moshe, right? It's just all over the place. Like that sort of, questioning of leadership and trying to move into a new stage of development, talking about development. But I think there's something else here, which is I wonder, so, I talk about the compliments here about rage and grief. I often wonder if we in America, maybe globally, are developmentally trying to move to a new stage of existence, but we're stuck in rage because we're not letting the grief happen. And talk about like the deaths of COVID, like immense, right? Talk about a moment of grief. So I wonder about that in terms of underlying our political movement. And a moment where leadership, the whole institution of leadership is in crisis, as you're saying. Okay. All right, Asha Chaim.
Wow, there's so much here. And
There's so much.
when you read the verse about Moshe being instructed to go into the holy place and retrieve the staff, back in the 10 plagues period, there was the staff of Moshe and there was the staff of Aaron. And I'm sorry that my camera is wonky today. If that's the same staff in the holy place, then that's the staff that we read about last week that miraculously blossomed and turned from a walking stick weapon into a sign of flourishing, as if there was a source of water. But leaving that aside, the first time Moshe strikes is striking the Egyptian. And Beth, maybe that could be seen as a sort of a self-defense-y kind of situation. I don't know.
Yeah.
But then later, Moshe takes a stick to solve a water problem, which is the waters are too bitter to drink. And Moshe throws a stick into the waters and they become sweet. So there are ups and downs here. There's not a single arc of history.
Absolutely. I once taught a session, the story of a stick, right? The stick goes through major transformations and in terms of, its uses for destruction and for saving and for killing. I mean, it's
the staff brought on the plagues, and perhaps a different stick sweetens the water.
Yeah.
And yes, God is trying over the long run to turn Moshe from a person of action and impulse into a person of words. And it will succeed in Devarim, but it can't succeed at this moment because of his grief. And whenever I have a friend who says, I know my parent died and I know Shiva is supposed to be 7 days, but I don't have time. I can only go to the funeral and then I need to get back to work. I use the death of Miriam as the cautionary tale that if you don't stop and grieve, then it's going to burst out in other ways, other worse ways. And they learn from this to mourn for Aaron and ritualize that.
Yes. And Moshe is a human being. He loses it. We all lose it. We all have plans to behave better, and then we don't. We lose it, right? I mean, that happens all too often for me. It's like, okay, I'm never going to speak that way again. Uh-oh. Like, what just happened? What do you mean? I had a different plan for myself. It shouldn't happen.
Miriam was the one who knew how to use words, and from the daughter of Pharaoh incident on. And Moshe will eventually become that person. But there's so many ups and downs. I want to just use that as a synecdoche for second chances, life after death, that there's a chance of redemption after a drastic failure like this.
Beautiful. Thank you. So yeah, he does, even though his limits to his leadership, and even though he will die sort of seeing the promised land but not having, he does become a man of words and a man of poetry. Right? Deuteronomy Deuteronomy ends with poetry. I do want to go on, so I wasn't going to call it spoken already. Very, very briefly. The people who say they will speak briefly don't, so go ahead.
God is endlessly present in the eternal now. He doesn't wait. Moses doesn't wait within the eternal now for further instruction.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to briefly, I'm just going to do the essence of this in English. Maimonides Ramban says that you see the highlighted place. All this, God said, although, I don't know, Sandy, grammar here exactly, but all of the sin of Moses consisted merely in that he departed from the moral mean of patience to the extreme of wrath, insofar as he exclaimed, "Hear now, ye rebels." So some of the commentators say that Moshe's sin was not in hitting the rock, but in treating the people the way he treated them, and being angry at them in the way he was. And remember, we discussed how this reversed the usual relationship, that usually God is angry and Moshe protects, and here Moshe is angry and God protects, or God at least waters. Yet for this, God found fault with him, that such a man as he should show anger in the presence of the entire community of Israel, where wrath is unbecoming. This was a profanation of God's name, because people, imitated the words and conduct of Moses, hoping thereby to attain temporal and eternal happiness. He's our spiritual model. So if he loses it, we'll all lose it, right? We need a spiritual model that doesn't lose it, that can show us a different way. How could he then allow his wrath-free play, since it is a pernicious characteristic arising, as we have shown, from an evil psychic condition? Okay, I'm not going to go on, but I am going to go on to something else. So here we are in this parsha of grief and loss and no water. And then there's a beautiful and mysterious series of verses.
And anger is a sin.
And anger is a sin. And in fact, the rabbis and the Talmud say, and Rambam brings this down to us, which is anger is actually like idolatry. And when I was thinking about that, why would Ka'as be like Avodah Zarah? Why would that be? And idolatry is sort of like taking spirit and making it into form. In a way, into form, like freezing it. In a way, it's sort of, trying to fix spirit in place. And there's something about anger that I think maybe freezes the process of grief, or just sort of freezes things as opposed to letting them go forward and emerge. And I think we are in a moment of a culture saturated by grief, but with a distraction of endless anger.
Yes. If it begins, you have to stop it immediately, but you have to also examine it and know where it comes from.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's look at this. This is a very mysterious, again, series of verses. I don't pretend to understand everything. And they're poetic, which means they're extra ancient. It refers to Al Kenya Amar. Actually, I'm going to ask Asher Chaim to read because my voice is getting older. I'm going to stop you frequently, though, in a couple of verses.
Al Kenya Amar. Therefore it is said, B'Sefer Milchemot Adonai, in the book of the wars of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Vahev Basufa Nahalim Arnon, Vahev in Sufa and the wadis of Arnon, Ve'eshed HaNahalim Asher Naktala Shevet Ar V'Nish'an L'Gvul Moav, along with the canyon wadis stretching along the settled country of Ar, leaning into the territory of Moav, Umisham Be'era, and from there towards Be'er, the well, Hi HaBe'er Asher Amar Adonai LeMoshe, Esof et ha'am v'yetna lahem mayim. That's the very same cistern or well, source of water, of which Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moshe, gather the people and I will give them water. Az Yashir Yisrael et Ashira Hazot. Then Israel sang this song, Ali ve'er enuv lah.
Rise up,
Rise up,
answer.
O source of water, and answer her.
Okay, let's stop there for a second. Were you going to say one more thing in your translation, Ashafayim? Did I interrupt? No? Okay. So let's look back to where we first see Az Yashir Yisrael Hashira Hazot. Then Israel will sing the song.
Echo
Here.
of Az Yashir Moshe et Hashira Hazot.
Exodus 15:1. Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Israel and Hashira Hazot. Then saying Moshe and the children of Israel this song to Adonai. So that's right after they got through or going through the Red Sea. They sing this song to God. And here it's Az Yashir Yisrael. Right now, Israel's singing its own song. What do they say? Rise up, O well, or rise up well, Anula, respond to her. Who's the her? So I read the her as Miriam. Now, and then they sing the strange thing, right? Okay, Ashafayim, go on with the next
Be'er
verse.
hafaru asarim, karu anedivei ha'am, bimchotek b'mish'anotam, umimidbar matana. The well that the princes dug, carved out by the elevated ones of the group, b'machokek, with scepter, with their rods, and from Midbar they went towards Matana.
Okay, so here the people are actually digging up the well. They're not complaining, and they're not depending on Miriam. They're finding another way after grief. We can do this. We can access this. And there's all kinds of interesting symbolism here. Like, for instance, Midbar Matana, right? The wilderness of gift. Is this the gift here? Matana Nachliel, and from the gift, the waters or streams of God, and from Nachliel, and from the waters and the streams of God to the high places. So there's something happening here. And what I want to do is lead us to two places. Go. Kalanimus Shapira, whose wife was named Miriam, and she died, and he was the one who was murdered in the Warsaw Ghetto. It says, when Miriam died, the well ceased flowing. Shemeita Miriam Mistalek Havaer. And from this we learn, when a Sadiq dies, Kishamet Sadiq, Ein Od Mayan Zivuto Patuach. The wellspring of their radiance is no longer open. Wow. Kikol Hatsiyun Betivo Bishfiato Pasim Hayat. For all of its radiance, both in its quality and its abundance, is bound up with his life. And it's interesting because he's writing this after his wife Miriam dies. So Kadesh Nefesh Lo Tivla Berik, to prevent the soul from being swallowed by emptiness. Otar Aleinu, the Shmor Chalufat Darfo, the Kanto, I'm not sure. We must preserve their path and teachings, or his or her path and teachings. Lahamshich v'lishkoa me'einei hanefesh, and continue immersing ourselves in the well springs of their soul. So what do we do in the place of their death? We dig a well. We dig a well and try to connect to their teachings and their flow, because upon their death, their flow ceases. Okay, one more thing, and then I'll see if we have time for some comments. Just note that there's a real distinction between Miriam's leadership and Moshe's in Exodus 15. So Moshe says, Az Yashir Moshe. Moshe says, and then, Moshe and Israel will sing the song, but it says, Moshe says, Hashir Adonai, I will sing. Right? It's in the I voice. But what does Miriam do? Miriam takes the timbrel, Tikach Miriam Neviah, Achot Aaron. Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, takes the timbrel in her hand. And all the women follow her. So there's already this sense of relationality. Betupim, ubimecholot, with timbrels and with dancing. But ta'an lahem Miriam, and Miriam responds to them. Shir Ladonai, sing to God, she tells them. So it's a whole different, in a few, brief words, we see that Miriam has a different relationship and a more relational relationship to the people. Okay, so now let's see with the Khatam Sofer, 18th, 19th century commentator, who I don't know a lot about, except that a rabbi of European Jewry.
I want to say super, super quick. I think it's really.
One line.
Yeah, one line.
Okay.
That I think it's really significant. I love this idea of digging the well, someone dies, and I think it's really significant that it's the elevated people that dig the well.
That it elevates them,
that.
yes.
No.
Oh.
It says that it's the nobles, which Asherheim translated as the elevated people.
I see.
In the previous part, and that specifically it's going back to my leadership point, that to connect with Miriam's style of leadership, the elevated people dig the well to connect to the waters.
Mm-hmm.
That was her style of leadership.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see what the Khatam Sofer says about her style of leadership. Or actually, we'll see different relationships to leadership here. I'm going to really read this one in English. So this is in response to Miriam the prophet, the sister of Aaron, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her. And regarding the men, it is written, and they believed in Adonai and in Moshe his servant. Right? So he's Ya'aminu b'Hashem Moshe. That line, he's interpreting that was specifically about the men. They believed in God and they believed in Moshe. They believed if Moshe was not performing wonders, God wouldn't be doing them through the hand of another. In other words, this whole thing depended on one man, and that was Moshe. And that's it. Therefore, they said, this is Moshe the man. We don't know what happened to him. At the golden calf, the crisis of leadership right there. Where is Moshe? In other words, they don't have access to God without Moshe. They don't have access to miracles without Moshe. Therefore, they requested a form upon which would rest the glory of God. So they're looking for another access point to God since they lost Moshe and they turned to a golden calf. But as Maimonides, Ramban said, the women had faith also in Miriam the prophetess, even though she did not perform miracles and nothing at all. I just read a few questions. She didn't perform anything at all, but whatever. The women had faith also in Miriam, not only in Moshe. Therefore, regarding the golden calf, the women did not have desire for it because they said, if there is no Moshe, there are other prophets. This whole thing doesn't depend on one man.
Very female. That's very female. Excuse me.
And this is why. And so the men, seeing that, what did they do? They plotted. The men gathered around Hur, the son of Miriam, because they thought if Hur would make them a god, since he's the son of Miriam, because of this, the women would also desire the form, the avodah zarah, the idolatry. Hur sacrifices himself, was merited to have Bezalel as a son, remember? Child of Miriam.